Hey, welcome to Q&A, where you ask your questions on faith and life, and I do my best to give a biblical perspective. Hey, we've got a question concerning what's happening over in Israel and the Gaza Strip at the moment. And just before I read the question and offer a perspective on it, can I just say that in the midst of everything that's happening there right now, I know people are going to have very strong views one way or the other. What matters most is that on both sides there are innocents who are paying a big price. There are people civilians who are losing their lives, who are living with fear, who are being traumatized through no fault of their own. There is a political uprising that was behind the Hamas's attack that was launched. That they're a minority. Most of the citizens there don't really want them there. They don't really want what back what they're trying to do. And so, rather than get into the whole politics of what's happening, first and foremost, we should be praying for the innocent victims, as well as praying for wisdom and peace and a way forward. And in the midst of that, I know some of you have got strong views, as I say. So, if you want to make a comment, feel free, but please be respectful of people who may have a differing perspective. With that in mind, let's jump in. I know that Israel has a claim to the land as it's in the Bible. However, do the Palestinians have a legitimate claim to the land they are claiming? And it's a good question, and I really can't do it justice. I'm not a historian. I don't really know all of the intimate detail of the history and the nuance of some of how that's played out. But I know enough to be able to give you an overview. And I just do want to say that I think that in order to understand the Palestinian situation, you really do need to understand a bit of history. And I say that because what we've seen over recent decades has been a rise in what might be termed Arab nationalism. And it's a relatively new phenomena. Up until 1920, there was no one thought of themselves as Syrian or Jordanian or Iraqi or Palestinian. And I say that because for the 400 years up until World War I, where everything changed, the entire area there was under the rule of the Ottoman Empire. And they regarded themselves, the citizens there, regarded themselves not ethnically in terms of, as I say, Jordanian, Syrian, Iraqi, Palestinian, or anything like that. They saw themselves simply as Arab-speaking Muslims subject to the Sultan. Their identity wasn't ethnic, it was religious. And that's how they understood themselves for that 400 years. And then after World War I, of course, with the defeat of the Ottoman Empire and everything around there, what happened was the League of Nations, which was the forerunner to the United Nations, divided Ottoman Asia up into 4 mandates. The mandates were essentially, they took all of the people in that area and they sought to assign countries to look after them, to help them find self-rule and autonomy. And basically the 4 mandates were handed to France and Britain. France was assigned the mandates for Syria and Lebanon. And of course, we now have the nations of Syria and Lebanon as they worked with the people in that region to form nationhood and become independent. And Britain was given the mandate for what was then called Mesopotamia, which we know as Iraq now, and Palestine. And basically, the situation as it was then was that they divided that area up into these four areas, if I could, well, very arbitrarily in many ways. And so we basically saw all of that geographic area that was comprised the Ottoman Empire, in that area, divided into 4, and wherever you happened to be living at that time determined essentially, and very simplistically, where you were, what you would become. And so as a consequence, we saw the Iraqi identity, the Syrian identity, and the Lebanese identity emerge out of that, as well as a Palestinian identity. But it all emerged out of what was the Ottoman Empire. And I say that because it's important, because it helps us understand that when we think of Palestinians, we aren't talking about an ethnic group in the same way we might talk about the Jews or we might talk about Maori here in New Zealand. We're talking about a group of people who lived in a particular geographic area at a particular time. And that group of people, there's about 500,000 were 10% Arab. There was about 25% of them were a mixture of Sudanese and Egyptians. They were economic refugees from the 19th and early 20th century. And about 40% of them, this will surprise a lot of people, were Jews who had converted to Islam in the 17th and 18th centuries. And all of these people were living in what is now referred to as, or what was then referred to as Palestine, which was essentially modern day Israel and that area. So to answer the question, do the Palestinians today have a legitimate claim to the land that they're claiming? You would have to say, according to the decision handed down by the League of Nations 100 years ago, the answer is no. The Palestinian identity, as we see it today, didn't exist, and the population was not a distinct people. As far as the UN, or what became the UN, was concerned, the vast majority of the Ottoman Arabs were given the opportunity to pursue national identity and independence, but those living within, as I say, within Palestine, they had to share that land with the Jews because it was recognized as their cultural or ancestral homeland. And at that point, as I say, there was about 500,000 Arabs, what let's call them Palestinians for the sake of it. And there was about 14 million Jews at that point. And what happened was the League of Nations said those Arabs living there had to live with the Jews, and the Jews, of course, being the dominant group there, having their land recognized in terms of being their ancestral land. Of course, they were the influencers, they were the decision makers, so to speak. Now, all of that's not to say that there aren't legitimate issues that need to be addressed, that we can turn our back on the humanitarian crisis that has been there on the Gaza Strip for quite some time. It doesn't mean to say that there haven't been political decisions that need to be accounted for that have impoverished people for no other reason than to punish them. It doesn't mean to say that a permanent or longer lasting solution can't be found, and it needs to be found. It doesn't take away from the fact either that it's a small minority of people who have highly politicized the situation for their own end that's causing so much of the conflict and so much of the destruction there. But I say it simply to make the point that you can't cast Israel as the enemy and Palestinian or Palestine as the victims, because to do so is to miss the point of and it's to mislabel the country and misunderstand and the history, and it's also to miss the point of what I think is really happening there in the Middle East, particularly in Israel, in regards to everything that is being leveled against her, which is that it's not about ethnic identity, it's about religious identity. I say that because if you take a step back, it's fair to say that there is a rising tide of anti-Semitism around the world at the moment. And look at how much hatred is being directed at Israel as a result, and how they're always labelled as the aggressor or as a threat to the surrounding Arab nations. And yet, if you take a step back and look at it objectively, the total area of the Arab countries that make up what's known as the Arab League is about 11.4 million square kilometres, and they have a population of about 346 million people. By comparison, Israel is just over 20,000 square kilometres. And that's right, 20,000 square kilometres with a population of around 9 million. So in terms of actual landmass, Israel is only about 0.18% of the Arab nations, and its population is only 2.5%. So why is it such a threat? Why is it being labelled the aggressor? Why is everybody so anti it? Because I think it goes back to religious identity. It goes back to what we read about in the Old Testament with Ishmael and the rise of what we call Islam now, and that deep-seated hatred that has grown up around what we read about in the scriptures. And I say that because if we understand it like that, then it helps us understand how we might respond more adequately, not looking to cast blame or to take sides, but to pray for the innocents of those on both sides, the victims, those who are being traumatized, those who are being used as human shields, those who have no voice and no say, but are being blamed by the rest of the world, who are paying a huge price. I think we need to pray for wisdom. We need to pray for peace, and we need to pray for a way to find a resolution that will allow people to live together in ways that bring peace and allow them to have a hope and a future. So yeah, I hope that gives some understanding to the situation. It's so much more than that, but it's just in regards to your question about the land. That's just what I want to focus on. I'm sure you'll have something to say. Post your comments below. Just be respectful. But as always, if you've got questions about faith and life, jump over to slido.com. Use the hashtag ALC23. Would love to hear from you. But that's it for now. Until next time, God bless.